Anybody here, this is like your first time to be exposed to blockchain and distributed ledgers? Anybody brand new? Good. All right. How about experts? Anybody consider yourself an expert? Near expert? All right, well, this is pretty good because this is what this is designed for. So, one of the things, having been around this space for a few years, it seems like there's a lot of, let me introduce this concept to you type material, and there's a lot of technical talks. But I'm trying to give you something that's a little more like 201 level. So I'm assuming you've been exposed to this. We're going to try to dive a little deeper without getting too technical, all right? And the big question here is, if you're familiar with this and you get the idea of a blockchain, distributed ledgers, distributed systems, conceptually you can get it, but you'll notice there are an awful lot of them floating around, right? So, what's the deal? Why are there so many? What makes them different? That's what we're going to cover today. All right, this looks good. Steve, you're fired. So 3 questions we'll go through tonight. Why are there so many of these? What makes them different from one another? And then we'll wrap up with just some thoughts on what's maybe coming next and how I'm thinking about that. All right? Ready? All right. So why? Well, from my perspective, it all starts, Bitcoin came along, and it really proved the case for blockchain technology. I mean, it's been around for 10 years, and even after a few years in, it became evident that this thing is working. I mean, maybe it's being used for nefarious reasons. Maybe it's difficult to use and you can lose your Bitcoin, but in the end, it works. And some of the big concepts that it demonstrated is, one, encryption can be used as an identification system, on a shared platform. So, the big deal there is, unlike pretty much anything else I've ever used where you're doing transactions, you don't have to go sign up for Bitcoin. You just show up with a pair of keys and you can play. It's reliable and resilient. So again, for all its congestion and things that went through last year, it's still working. And all the records are there, and the sort of redundancy in the design of it have really proven out. Tamper resistance, again, lots of dramatic kind of thefts, mistakes, and things, but no one has managed to just straight out crack the blockchain. And finally, transparency. And especially in the case of Bitcoin, anybody, at least with the right skill set, you got to add that in, can verify transactions and balance. Anybody can just peek in there and check that something's legitimate and verify it right away. Right. And by the way, with this audience, no problem asking questions along the way. So let me know. So after that, a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin and saying, it seems to be working really well. You've got this, kind of money system that's running on its own, seems secure. Can we do something else with it? And, started looking at some new use cases, and these are probably look familiar. Smart contracts. That's really saying, all right, a Bitcoin transaction is actually kind of a contract. I'm agreeing to send, say, Steve some Bitcoin. That's the contract. But can we do something more complicated, right, with some more conditions and digital ownership records? So Bitcoin keeps track of Bitcoin ownership, right? But could we keep track of other stuff, right? And, classic thing, a title or a deed, right? So, you have your car, but then the legal ownership of that is proved with a title. So that could be represented on a blockchain. Supply chain has been a big adopter of blockchain. Again, it's more about transparency, authenticity seem to be key points, and trade finance. So supply chain is not an area of expertise for me, but as I understand it, one of the things that's tricky is you're often trying to finance something that someone else is financing that someone else is financing, right? And having that all sort of visible in a common ledger, very useful. Social media and Internet of Things. This is actually where that whole encryption as identification comes into play, because these are two things that we love our social. We're starting to love our Internet of Things. They work much better and they're a lot more fun when they know a lot about you. But the problem is then they know a lot about you, and that information is not really in your hands. So there is this potential to give you control of that information and still enable these applications. Auditing and compliance, again, anything that happens on the Bitcoin blockchain, anybody can just go in and look. So, there's real opportunity for, business situations where there's a lot of interaction and maybe a lot of settlement and auditing needs to go on. This gives you a common set of records that you don't need to necessarily reconcile. You just look in there and see what's going on. Finally, voting. I think that voting is going to probably find its use, earlier on in corporate governance or distributed app governance. I think, public elections is probably a ways off, but, theoretically it's there. And again, these are just some. So, all these ideas came out of, hey, if this will work for just a cryptocurrency, we could do these things, but it's not all there in Bitcoin. So what started happening is, developers started either enhancing the things that are out there, starting with Bitcoin, or creating new ones. And really, this happens in a few ways. When we're talking about enhancements, the soft fork, what this really means is we're going to add a feature, but you can take it or leave it. So if you're part of the Bitcoin network and we release this feature and you don't want it, can't be bothered, that's fine. We're all still one big network. But sometimes you're going to design something that would require a hard fork. What this means is we're changing the system in a way that it won't work with the old records anymore. So if you want to come along, we all got to go this way. And this is one that was getting a lot of press lately. There's a lot going on in the Bitcoin Cash community around this of, when there's the fork and not everybody can agree, you actually can end up with two separate digital ledgers. They go their separate ways. So that's kind of you can enhance that way, or you can basically end up splitting off something new that way. And really, kind of into the new territory, reusing code is a common way that new technologies come out. And in the corporate space, things like Hyperledger, Corda are these, almost like a Lego kit for blockchain, right? So what those provide are the pieces that you can assemble to make your own solution. And then also, some of the technologies out there are just, Litecoin, he got the code for Bitcoin and started rewriting it to make the changes he wanted, and that's Litecoin. So reuse is a big part of it. And then there are some that are just straight up wrote it from scratch, right? We've got, the concept of how we verify transactions and all, but we're just going to do new code for various reasons that you take that approach. So this is how you end up with different digital ledger technologies. And again, this end being, here's how we tune up what we've got, and here's how we create something entirely new. All right? Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So, and I think this is a big question in the space is like, I don't. Oh, sorry. The question was, when someone creates a new one of these, how do you know it's legit? And it's a very good question. I mean, it takes a skill set to do it, is the short answer. One thing that gets a bit technical, but these things are actually protocols and not software, meaning it defines, all right, when this happens, X comes out. X goes into the ledger, right? And so you should be able to look at a ledger that one of these is producing and verify, okay, this is an actual hash of, this. So someone with the technical expertise can go in and look.
So there is an entity
right.
certified as a legit blockchain.
I think they probably are now. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. I don't know that there's not one that's recognized like ISO. Yeah. There's not something like that yet. I think just like the W3C, is that the one that does the web standards? Right. I would anticipate something like that arising. I know there are things like that going on. But yeah, there's not a standard yet. And it's a very good question because a lot of this, when I started using Bitcoin, it's pretty amazing. Not quite sure how it feels just like using your credit card, right, in a way. So yeah, it takes a definite skill set to really be able to pick it apart and verify.